Hello, I'm Jon Manekin and welcome to Falls Road Mushroom Company. I'm standing by a bunch of bags of sawdust, which is our main input for our mushrooms. Basically, we use agricultural waste products of sawdust and soy hulls as our input for our substrate. And the reason for that is the species of mushrooms that we're growing, the saprophytic species, they're wood-loving species. These are the types of mushrooms that you would find in an old-growth forest, breaking down fallen trees. And this is the ideal food source for those species because it provides not only the nutrition, but sort of the matrix for them to grow their mycelium. The mycelium is the root body of the mushroom. I often tell people if mushrooms are the apple, mycelium is the apple tree. So basically by sourcing this organic natural waste product in pellet form, we're able to generate 10-pound bags of substrate with our bagging machine. Those bags are then sterilized in our steam sterilization barrel. From there, we move them into our lab area where the bags cool and then are inoculated with grain spawn. The grain spawn, similar to these bags here, is sourced again from organic partners. That's Milo sorghum, which provides the same high-intensity nutrition that the mycelium needs to jump off and really get going. Once we introduce the grain spawn to the bags, we then seal them and allow them to incubate in our incubation area. The bags stay in this area on average maybe 2 to 3 weeks before being moved into our fruiting chamber in our grow room. That environment provides the ideal conditions found in nature. Basically, with controlled environment agriculture, we're able to create the environment that allows these mushrooms to thrive. We introduce humidity, fresh air, light, and temperature, again, at ideal conditions. And once introduced, the mushrooms fruit in about 7 to 10 days. We'll get iterative flushes off of those blocks. And once the mushrooms have been harvested, we remove the blocks from the grow tent. And what's unique and what we're excited about with this operation especially is what we're trying to do in repurposing our spent fruiting blocks. These blocks of mycelium at the very basic level provide for tremendous compost. They're the ideal partner for soil regeneration projects where you're trying to turbocharge your compost to increase the biodiversity in your soil, add for water retention and healthy, microbiome, what have you, to generate that soil. What we hope to be able to accomplish on a larger scale is actually mycoremediation, where we are using these blocks at scale to break down things like the forever chemicals, creosote, sequester heavy metals from migrating into the water table, provide a symbiotic relationship with partner plants where we can increase the health and vitality of the plants in the area as well. So really go out and try to heal the planet with these spent fruiting blocks and other mycoremediation applications. But to create that sustainability, create that kind of bioefficiency in our production is really important because at the end of the day, we're trying to repurpose waste to grow healthy, nutritious food for our community and then to take that byproduct and heal the planet with it. And all done from an urban environment in a controlled environment so we don't have to use things like pesticides and fertilizers to combat climate, drought, fire. It's all done indoors, and in doing so we can kind of control every step of the process that way. So we combine the sawdust and the soy hulls at a 50-50 ratio and hydrate to about 55-60%. That's in the mushroom business known as the master's mix, and that's the ideal combination for yields and harvest quality. But one thing that we're going to explore moving forward is using other waste products like cardboard and coffee grounds. Two things that cities have a lot of because the mushrooms, especially oyster mushrooms, can thrive on those substrates as well. So the hope or the idea of being able to really truly repurpose and recycle and reuse some of this waste products, especially that's sort of centralized in cities, is something that's really exciting about this business and moving forward and growing. So this is cutting edge mushroom technology. This is my Thor bagger, and it's a simple system and a basic setup, but it's fairly new to the industry. And what this allows me to do is basically create 60 blocks in less than 2 hours. And The machine has 2 hoppers, one for sawdust, one for soy hulls. It is hooked up to a water line, and all of these are calibrated within the machine, which uses compressed air to feed the bags at calibrated weights and ratios, the water and the sawdust, so you get the perfect mixture. But this allows me to really streamline operations, a very efficient, simple machine, and it's exciting to see this type of advancement in the cultivation business.
And of course, but at the beginning, like if someone was starting off, they wouldn't specifically need this machine to get a mushroom company started.
No, this machine is certainly intended for creating a lot of blocks in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
So for mushroom companies like us who are looking to scale and scale quickly, it's very handy because it allows us to produce, by myself at this point, 240 bags or blocks a week. Each block should yield about 5 pounds of mushrooms, so that's a lot.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. So once these bags, the sawdust is absorbed, without touching the inside, fold them up. So these filter patches on the bags allow for gas exchange when the mushroom mycelium has colonized the blocks.
Okay.
What we're doing now is basically just trying to create a nice tight seal so when these go into the barrels, they can be sterilized. So once we have the blocks ready, we load them up into this bubble barrel. This is a 130-gallon modified barrel that has a water reservoir in the bottom as well as an electric heating agent or element. This is the brain. It cooks for 207 degrees for 16 hours. And you can see that giant steam tray. So what we basically work to do is create like a pattern at the bottom. So that's one of 60 that we'll load into this barrel before turning it on to cook.
1 out of 60.
1 out of 60.
Wow. Keeps you
that.
fit.
Yeah, keeps us fit. A lot of steps. So this is an important part of the process because what we're putting together between the sawdust and the soy hulls is ideal food for fungus. It's exactly what they love to eat. It's exactly what a lot of fungus loves to eat. So, fungi, I should say. So what we're trying to do is sterilize it so there's no competing fungi, bacteria, other organisms in the substrate prior to inoculation. So once the mycelium goes in, it's going into a very clean, sterile environment where it's got its food and its structure and it just can eat and run wild. We just unloaded about 60 blocks through this little porthole that we've created because this ante-room allows for us to bring material in and out. But what we're trying to do is control the flow of airborne bacteria and other competing funguses that would get in and be a contamination threat to what we're growing in our sterile lab. This lab is fitted out with HEPA-filtered air that pumps positive pressure into this room, so there's constantly air pushing against this room, keeping any airborne fluid stuff at bay. But what this doggy door allows us to do is basically take our blocks, which are still warm and hot at that point, and load them onto this roller table, and then we stack them on the racks, which allow them to cool. And that's an important part of the process as well, because the blocks have to be below 90 degrees Fahrenheit before the grain spawn is introduced. Any higher temperature and you have the risk of killing the organism. So the process involves basically getting those blocks, putting them in a clean surface where we have our laminar flow hoods blowing HEPA-filtered clean air over the work area. And then I take the grain bags, and each one of those bags can inoculate 25 10-pound bags of sawdust, which is great scale. But as we inoculate the blocks, seal them, put them onto racks, provide labels, and then roll them out into our incubation colonization area. So one of the things I love about this process is our ability to control from inception. By that I mean we get liquid culture genetics from partners around the country, and we've got this library now which is sustained in those jars, basically with 500 milliliters of water and some honey, we can create a nutrient broth that allows the liquid culture mycelium to live and live happily for years. So that gives us the ability to continue to draw genetics from these sources. So, one jar of liquid culture can potentially create millions of pounds of mushrooms. And we test them regularly for vitality and health and monitor them, obviously, but it's almost like a sourdough starter in that it's this organism that once you provide just the basic essentials for its needs, food and shelter, it lives happily for a long time. So this is pretty cool. I was able to take a couple pieces of grain from a bag of pink oyster mushroom mycelium and center it on the middle of this petri dish. And I did that because I wanted to try to expand out this culture. And it also is a great way to test for the health and vitality of the organism. But just by sticking, 2 pieces of grain into the center of this dish 2 weeks ago, it has now grown out into this really fine mat of mycelium. And what I'm able to do, and you can see, is I've sort of taken out 2 wedges, which I've dropped into bags of grain spawn, which then go on to inoculate that grain and take over the grain and grow. So this is just another way that we can monitor the health and quality of our genetics, but also use it as an inoculation tool for our grain spawn. But it creates these beautiful patterns. So these are a really cool species of mushroom, which I'm excited about. These are bitter oyster mushrooms, which aren't necessarily an edible. You wouldn't want to eat these, but they're a bioluminescent mushroom in that they glow in the dark. So I'm really excited because I think things that glow in the dark are very cool, but they're also a very potent mycoremediant. They have the ability to break down, degrade, and decontaminate a lot of nasty stuff in the ground. So we're just running some samples and studies on different substrates and how well they work, but it's been a really fun experiment to play with these different cultures, different varieties, and these beautiful mushrooms. But they create these gorgeous kind of striation patterns as they grow out onto the dish and hopefully start glowing in the dark. So one of the things I first found out about the bitter oyster mushrooms, I was doing some research, and the first recorded first record of them was about 2,000 years ago, and Pliny the Elder saw this cold fire, he called it, where the bioluminescent mushrooms were growing in a field of olive trees, and they were sort of cold to the touch. But later, when the French traders were coming to the United States and doing trapping and getting into the mountains, they encountered in Appalachia a species of bioluminescent mushroom which they called faux fire, as in fake fire. And then colloquialized to foxfires. So the idea of foxfires, these bioluminescent trails of glow-in-the-dark mushrooms in the woods that create pathfinding and obviously a lot of cool stories around them. But I thought that was a really interesting history on the glow-in-the-dark mushrooms. So this is a block of lion's mane that was inoculated in the beginning of May. So that was about a little over a month ago. And basically the mycelium has grown from out of the block and started to grow up the bag. So this is not the mushroom itself. This is just the raw mycelium, the root body that has not touched any sawdust or any other nutrients, and it's just sort of grown out of this bag. So this is the stuff that everybody's kind of getting excited about with supplements and in their tinctures. And the way we harvest is lop the top off. So it's just this really light, wispy, looks like coral.
Wow.
And then we'll clean off the base. There you go. And we will store this, freeze it, and then freeze dry it. And then from that point, we can process it into powder. Here we go. Lots of beautiful mycelium. So the mycelium is seen by many as the earliest it is the earliest stages of growth for the mushrooms themselves. And I've heard people describe it kind of almost like the stem cells, if you will, of the mushrooms. The fruiting body is the end result of the organism's lifespan in that it has exhausted its food source, alerted a fruiting body to emerge, which then lets out spores, which goes out and finds new food sources. So the conversation in the supplement space often goes, which is better, the mycelium itself or the fruiting bodies? The reality is both have novel compounds within them that provide healthy benefits. And the best is when you can, I think, get a combination of both, but also in raw and other forms, but I'm not a doctor. The thing about lion's mane that has everybody very excited is its active compounds, the hericiums and the erinacines, which are neurotrophic growth factors that allow for the brain axioms in the brain to grow and strengthen. It has the ability to kind of penetrate the blood-brain barrier, which is one of the things that makes it very exciting. But that's why you're seeing in a lot of coffee and other supplements and tinctures, because of that cognitive enhancing functionality. And as I think more research is done, we'll learn about even more healthy benefits associated with it. But it's really exciting in that sort of cognitive space. And in harvesting both the mycelium and the fruiting bodies, we're trying to capture all of the best elements of the mushroom so that we can offer, all the options to our customers, our clients, and then we're also making sure that we're using everything. We want to use the entire buffalo. So if there's mycelium that we can harvest and process into, healthy tinctures or supplements, once harvested, we take the mycelium and put it in our freezer. This is best practices in terms of processing for the freeze dryer. They tell you to freeze it first, so that we do. Then we slice it into about half-inch strips, which we put in trays upon trays to fill this unit up, which we run for about 24 hours. And the process in the freeze drying is actually kind of fascinating, but it basically lowers the temperature to the point where the water crystallizes, and then it warms it back up just enough that that crystal evaporates, and then it vacuums out all that moisture, delivering this totally moisture-free product, which provides for a 25-year shelf life in terms of, which compared to dehydrators, which is more like 2 years, provides for the longest shelf life. So the hope was to basically freeze dry any surplus harvest so there's no waste in the operation, and we can provide freeze-dried products to our clients' customers who are interested in not only supplements in the medicinal space, but also just freeze-dried fruiting bodies that they can enjoy later by rehydrating, and can stay in their pantry for many years, or they can enjoy it right away. So we also dehydrate some of our mushrooms as well. There's a school of thought that the heat actually activates some of the compounds within the mushrooms. So by the freeze-drying process, we're able to, again, activate those compounds without degradation or loss. And the result is a different flavor profile, but they're delicious. So again, we hate waste, and I dehydrated a bunch of blue oyster mushrooms and vacuum sealed them in these bags, and these can sit in a pantry for years. But all you would have to do is just open them up and rehydrate them in your favorite sort of marinade or a soup or something like that, and enjoy these delicious rehydrated mushrooms. So once the mycelium has been frozen and freeze-dried, we take it and put it into this milling machine to create this fine powder. So this is 100% pure. This is this stuff that has been freeze-dried, powdered, and put into these Ziploc bags. But this is freeze-dried 100% pure lion's mane mycelium. So once the blocks have been inoculated in the lab and heat sealed, I move them out into this incubation area where they'll stay for a number of weeks. It depends on the species. We actually grow over, we have genetics for over a dozen, but we currently have about 6 different species in production, and each one has its own sort of set of growing parameters. So some of these blocks, by way of example, we talked about lion's mane. This is golden oyster, which is one of our exciting new species. It's great for the summer months. So this is a block of golden oyster, in fact, a whole shelf of it. And I'm excited about this because it's a warm weather species. And what we're trying to do is build in a consistent offering of lion's mane and a variety of oyster mushroom, as well as a few others on a seasonal offering. But throughout the year, because we're in a controlled environment, we can, predictably grow these species with regular projected yields. And with the hot summer months, it's nice to build in some different species that respond better to this environment. Just like in the cold weather, we'll be doing the same. But golden oysters as well as pink oysters do very well in the summertime. And these blocks will really only take 2 to 3 weeks to colonize. These are already starting to grow fruiting bodies, primordia they're called, sort of the earliest stages of the fruiting bodies. Typically you'll see what we call pinning, when there's these small little dots, but that's after you've kind of opened these bags and exposed them to fresh air and moisture. But this is really the block telling us that it's ready to go to the tent, which is where the fruiting occurs.
Let's go check that out.
So when I'm producing these blocks, I'm using the grain spawn and I'm mixing it. I'm really shaking the bags, and that's because I'm trying to get even distribution of these little bits of grain, which are inoculation points for the mycelium. And if we've done a good job, you can see these spider webs start to form, and these are all those different inoculation points starting to expand. And this is happening in kind of 3 dimensions. So if you imagine like in the middle of the bag as well, this is all kind of how the mycelium takes over and devours a block. So it's interesting to watch it in these early phases. We have a whole shelf here of pink oyster mushrooms, Pleurotus dijamor. These golds are ready as well. So that's cool because, they're dropping spores. So these are our pink oyster mushrooms. Some people call them flamingo oysters, which I think is really kind of a beautiful name for them. But they're delicious and they're healthy for you. I was just referring to some information. They're great for your gut biome. A lot of studies link health, happiness to what's happening in your gut, and these provide for great microbial biodiversity. And the harvesting is super easy and fun. You just kind of grab them by the base and lift.
That easy.
That easy.
That's crazy. Look at that. Hold on. Sweet.
So that, so we got 1.7.
Now, can you use this again?
So once I've harvested off this side, I just come in there. Now it goes back in the tent, where it'll fruit again in about 7 to 10 days. Our golden oyster mushrooms, Pleurotus citrinoplitus, and they're delicious. We had some for Father's Day. With all of these, we've really enjoyed putting them in a pan and roasting them at about 425 or 450 for 15 minutes. And they've got a great crunch and chew, seasoned with a little olive oil and sea salt. It's that easy, and the kids love them. They're just like delicious chips. Just like the other ones, harvest with lion's mane is pretty easy. You just kind of grab it by the base and just give it a little twist. And out comes these gorgeous lion's mane. And unlike a lot of capped mushrooms, lion's mane have these long extended hyphae, not hyphae, but they're tendrils that drop spores off the very bottoms, but they grow these long teeth. And this is a really cool mushroom because it's got sort of a seafood quality. A lot of people liken it to crab or lobster. I've tried it with like lion's mane crab cakes, which are delicious. There are a number of different ways to cook it. It actually peels and it can be made like pork as well. Like a lot of these mushrooms just grab hold of whatever flavors you add to them, but it provides that deep kind of rich umami flavor. So it's a delicious mushroom, but it's also a very potent functional mushroom. The cognitive enhancement associated with the hericiums and the erinacines in this specifically are really exciting. So there's a lot of growing body of evidence about how healthy these are for you, for your brain. Mushrooms in general are great for the gut biome, immune modulating properties, beta glucans, polysaccharides, all these really helpful supporting compounds that your body needs to sort of stay healthy and perform. But lion's mane is one of those beautiful combinations of both, where it's a very potent medicinal functional mushroom, but also a choice gourmet edible. And it's one thing we grow a lot of. So I grew up in Baltimore, and I grew up in a real estate family, and that's what I'd been doing for the last 20 years prior to founding Falls Road Mushroom Company. What happened was about a year and a half ago, in a post-COVID environment, I started looking at, with concern, the issue of vacancy in downtown office properties. And I was worried about what it could mean for not just Baltimore City, but cities around the country and around the world, if this issue persisted. So I wanted to come up with an alternative use case and another use for these buildings. And I started to think through vertical farming, which I thought would be an interesting adaptation because we could provide the downtown populations, the most concentrated populations, access to healthy, fresh, delicious food, and that would create synergy and new energy in downtowns, and take care of things like food deserts where people are struggling to get access to these healthy ingredients and healthy foods, and again, hopefully add a boost to an economy that was languishing a little bit, and introducing and celebrating clean, nutritious food and production through urban agriculture. Anyway. Long story short, the business model made more sense for mushrooms as I looked at the amount of mushrooms we could grow out of much smaller space. And unlike vertical farming that was heavily dependent on a lot of lights and the operating cost of running that electricity, with mushrooms, we were using agricultural waste. We were using sawdust and soy hulls, and we could use other waste products, but we're focusing on those in the means of growing these healthy, nutritious foods in an urban environment. And then on top of that, we wanted to close this loop with the environment by repurposing these spent fruiting blocks into soil regeneration and bioremediation projects in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, which again adds to the health and vitality of our community and our city by giving back and being better stewards of the land. So my hope is that this business will accomplish that and be able to grow and provide our customers and our communities with these delicious varieties of mushrooms that are good for their health. And as we grow, that enables us to make a larger impact on these bioremediation and microremediation projects where we have larger partners and larger scale and can really put a dent in decontaminating and repurposing a lot of this underutilized property and underutilized land. It's a legacy that I would hope you're very proud of. Growing healthy food for your community is an honor and a privilege. But what you leave behind in terms of our interaction with the natural world and our stewardship of it is something that we owe to the next generations, and that's why I'm so hopeful that this will work, because we're sort of doing it for them.
Amazing. Well, guys, that's it for this episode here in Baltimore with Jon. Well, guys, that's it for this week's episode on Chef's Perspective. Jon Manekin. All right, guys, well, that's it for this episode, and I'm leaving with a stack. Look at this. I'm extremely lucky. Falls Road Mushroom Company is incredible. Go check them out on their Instagram and their socials. This is amazing. Sorry, let me get out the road before I get knocked over by a truck. Falls Road. Not bad, huh?